So in today's video, we're going to look at the science of making a quiche, or specifically short crust pastry. So the first thing you're going to need to do is to sift your flour in order to mechanically add air. Now, mechanical raising agents and physical raising agents work together. So you're going to mechanically add your air so that when it goes into the oven later, that will create the physical raising agent in order to help provide the crumbly texture of the pastry that we want. We don't want it to rise too much though, just a little bit in this recipe. Then the next thing you need to do is to dice your butter, and you need to keep it as cool as possible. So before you start, rinse your hands, rinse any equipment such as your palette knife under cold water, and store your butter in the fridge until the very last minute, until you need it. The reason we need to keep that butter cool is because that is going to provide our shortening. The shortening is going to coat the gluten, which is a protein found in the flour. It's going to give it a nice coating, sort of like a waterproof jacket, so that when we add the water in a moment, the gluten doesn't become strong, because when gluten mixes with water, it becomes strong, and we don't want that. We want to have a short pastry. A short pastry is a crumbly pastry. On the other hand, a long dough or a long pastry is one that can stretch. So think of like bread dough, it becomes really stretchy because of the strong gluten. In this recipe, we want to keep that as crumbly as possible, so we want it short, hence the name short crust. If the butter isn't kept cool, then it's going to melt slightly and it won't provide that nice firm coating that we need from our water. Then the next part is to rub in that butter into our flour, and we're going to be looking for something resembling a breadcrumb-like texture. When we're rubbing in, again, it's still important that we're not melting that butter. We're keeping it as cool as possible. So if necessary, run your hands under cold water again and do that several times throughout if you need to. As you're rubbing it in, make sure you're lifting that butter to the height of the rim of the bowl, because as you're rubbing in that butter and that flour together, again, you're mixing in a little bit more air. That's another mechanical raising agent that you're using. Once you've achieved a texture that looks like breadcrumbs, then you're going to slowly add your water. And again, your water needs to be kept cold because we don't want to melt that butter that's providing that waterproof coating for our gluten. So keep that water in the fridge, or even better, put some ice cubes in it or keep it in the freezer for a few minutes before using it. Make sure it's cold. Only add a couple of tablespoons at a time. You want to add your water slowly. If you add too much, you're going to ruin your pastry. And as you slowly add your water, then you're going to start to gently knead your pastry into a dough. You want to add just the right amount of water so that it holds together, but it's not a sloshy, squishy dough. You want it just so that it holds together, and if you put a bit of pressure on it, it doesn't crack. Once you've achieved that texture, then the next thing you're going to do is roll it out. Put plenty of flour over your table and then put your pastry in a small ball on top of it. I personally find it easier to put the flour then on top of the pastry rather than onto the rolling pin, but you need to find whatever works best for you. As you roll it out, you're going to do one gentle roll away from yourself and then move your pastry round a quarter of a turn and repeat. So another single roll away from yourself, gently turn it around. A single gentle roll away from yourself, a quarter turn. Now you must make sure you roll it gently. If you push too hard, it is going to crack, and we don't want that. We want it to hold together as much as possible, and you want to give it a quarter turn between every roll for two reasons. One is so that we get a nice even shape. I've got a circular dish, so I want to keep my pastry into a nice circular shape as much as I possibly can. And the other reason is it's going to stop it from sticking to the table. Or if it does start to stick, you will know, you'll be able to pick it up and put a little bit more flour down underneath. Once you've rolled it out big enough for your pastry dish or your flan dish like I've got here, then you can just lift it up and pop it in, and then just use a palette knife to trim off all the excess. You'll then need to prick your pastry with a fork in several places. This is to let out any air, so that if there are any large pockets of air, they can escape, because they are going to act as a physical raising agent. And although we want there to be a slight raise in our pastry in order to help create that crumbly texture, we don't want it to raise too much. You'll then need to cover the pastry with some greaseproof paper and a layer of dried beans or lentils or something like that. You'll then need to blind bake your pastry for about 15 minutes. While your pastry is baking, you can prepare your filling. So I'm going to use about 6 eggs. First of all, I'm going to break 3 into a jug and then add my other fillings. So I've got some spring onion and some sausage and some ham. Then when my pastry comes out of the oven, I'm going to pour that mixture carefully inside my pastry, and I'm then going to break the other 3 eggs, beat them gently and pour them over the top, and then I'm just going to add my tomatoes on top like this.